Moving on to item number 6. This will be our sign ordinance update. Be presented by Mr. Arnaldo Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Council, Arnoldo Rodriguez, Development Services Department. The item before you is an update to the existing sign code, which was last comprehensively updated from what I can gather back in 2004. Okay. So the process itself for updating the sign code dates back to approximately 2009 from speaking to a handful of my comments. They thought it even dated prior to that. So this item's come before the both the City Council and the Planning Commission, both in the form of workshops, and then also a couple of different public hearings. In response to that, a number of years ago, the city established an ad hoc sign committee. I, as council's aware, I was not at the city at the time, so one of the things that I did in order to prepare this sign code is that I did extensive research in terms of notes, presentations, city council reports, agenda items, to try to get a better handle in terms of what was proposed, what the community was willing to accept, and at the same time, if there were any major red flags in terms of what the community did not want to see in our community. So the sign code before you tonight, I think, is a comprehensive, it's pretty exhaustive in terms of all the issues that were hashed out over the preceding 7 or so years. A couple of takeaways that go back to the 2011 City Council workshop at the time was that there was a lot of discussion about moving mannequin signs, temporary banners, AFrame signs, special event signs, and electronic signs. And I'll touch on all of those briefly tonight. However, staff is prepared to go into great in-depth detail if that's the desire of the council. So just more recently, we held a public workshop with the City Council back in February, followed by 2 public hearings, both in front of the City Council or the Planning Commission. They have recommended that the City Council can move forward with the proposed sign code update. A couple of goals of the sign code update at a basic minimum is to have comprehensive, concise, very streamlined guidelines. I attempted to incorporate a lot of tables, a lot of graphics, rather than employing a lot of words, which can sometimes be interpreted a little bit differently than intended. And at the same time, one of our overall goals was to relax the overall standards of the sign code, but at the same time raise the bar in terms of the appearance of the signs. And so that was at a basic minimum. That was kind of our starting point. And at the same time, I should probably go back to this one. One of the key things that's always somewhat challenging when you're writing a new code, it's under-regulation versus over-regulation. And oftentimes with sign codes, you're often describing what you want, but at the same time, oftentimes you're describing what you don't want, which is it's somewhat of a nuance for zoning codes. Sign codes are a little bit different in comparison to other codes because there's so many different variations of what a sign can or cannot be. And at the same time, they're heavily regulated by different state regulations and court cases. So the overall, one of the things that the city's been somewhat lax on is the enforcement of the existing sign code. So although staff is proposing that we become a lot more permissive in terms of what is permitted, that's going to be coupled with additional enforcement to make sure that people are complying with whatever we approve. So there may initially be a slight perception in the community that we're actually tightening the zoning regulations. However, as you'll see this evening, we are actually making them a lot more business friendly. In terms of the text, there's 2 versions that are out. One of them, which I'm referring to as the clean version, which highlights exactly what's going to be proposed, and there's kind of the working draft of the document, which has a lot of strike-throughs and different colored fonts. One of the things that I wanted to be extremely clear about was making sure that both the council, the planning commission, and the public is very transparent in terms of where we're at today and in terms of, I think, where we would want to go as a community. So again, added a lot of tables, graphics instead of words. And then we've also added some additional regulations to make the tables a little bit more user-friendly. So a couple of things, we've added design principles. We've clarified when permits are required, when signs are exempt, and we've also added additional signs that may be currently not permitted. We've made them exempt so people can actually install signs without the benefit of city permits, and they can simply do it subject to compliance with some nominal regulations. A couple of things, so I'm going to dive right into a couple of the different sign types. One of the most common sign types is a wall sign. So in terms of wall signs, we are not proposing any modifications in terms of the amount that's permitted, the area, or the location. The only thing that we are proposing, again, is to raise the bar a little bit in terms of the quality of the sign. And we think that that actually reflects current shopping standards, just business practices. So for a very good example, one of the things that we're encouraging are individual letters, both internally lit, which is the Starbucks signs, or backlit, which is the Whole Food signs. Cabinet signs, in this case, would be limited. The city currently does not have regulations on the limitation on cabinet signs. Awning signs, again, very few proposed modifications to that. The only thing that we are proposing here is that we've added language for the material of the sign and also the lighting of the sign, because if you have internally or backlit lighting, they're simply not very aesthetically pleasing, and so we required that the awning signs not be plastic. Monument signs is probably one of the larger changes, but however, those changes only pertain to the architectural design of the sign. The size, height, location, or the amount in terms of overall square footage. There are no proposed regulations in terms of what we have today. The overall goal here was, again, simply raise the quality of the sign itself. And we've highlighted the priority sign, the yellow sign on the overhead is simply not preferred. And of course, we would prefer something with some additional architectural enhancements, such as a rock veneer or stone or something like that, which would be the one on the left-hand side. And then we've also, again, we've added some criteria that clearly articulates in terms of the base standards and everything else. So when someone picks it up, it's very clear, it's concise, they don't necessarily have to come into the city. And at that point, you're really not trying to negotiate with someone in terms of what the city expects, rather the expectations are extremely clear for an applicant or for the business community. One of the bigger changes is we're proposing to allow electronic message boards. Electronic message boards are not permitted in our community at this time. So with our proposal, a couple of key highlights. Again, they're currently not permitted. Staff is recommending that if we do approve the sign code as proposed, a use permit would be required. We're also, we would recommend that we would initially limit them to Highway 20 and State Route 99. And at the same time that the parcel size itself be a minimum of 5 acres with the 300-foot street frontage, that the static messages change every 10 minutes, and that the signs incorporate dimming technology so they're not extremely bright at night when to attract or disrupt passing vehicles or
just so we don't
drivers.
have to go back to it, Arnaldo, it's every 10 seconds, not every 10 minutes, right?
It's every 10 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. The other item, we are proposing that the signs themselves be full color rather than monochrome. So monochrome sign is simply one color. So again, we would propose something along the lines of the Castrol Edge, as opposed to the free and home consolation that you see there. So again, it's a slightly nicer sign, so we are proposing to allow them, but again, we're going for quality of the sign as well. And at the same time, what's not in the staff report or in the proposed ordinance, which we would recommend adding this evening, is that we add a condition that the pixel resolution, currently it simply states a high pixel resolution. We would propose that that be 14 millimeters, and that's really the spacing of the pixelation. So the lower the number, the higher quality sign. From speaking with 3 different companies that manufacture the signs over the past couple of months, they felt that the 14 millimeters is reasonable, and that the market it's still affordable to a lot of businesses. From speaking with them, the technology is changing extremely rapidly. From speaking with them, they told me that within a year or two, that number is going to be about 10 to 12. AFrame signs, this is something the city, that I believe, has historically struggled with in terms of allowing them or not allowing them. We are proposing to allow them, again, with some criteria. So one of the key things is we're recommending to not allow plastic AFrame signs. So for example, the stop sign or the blue star sign would be plastic. We also have some design criteria, and we would also encourage businesses to use creative sign types. For example, the child there, which I think it's a boutique. It's a child's boutique. But however, there's no set criteria in terms of the shape of it, but there are some criteria in terms of the material itself. Subdivision signs are currently not permitted in our community. However, with that being said, I think we can all probably point to a couple of them in our community. We are proposing to allow them. The key thing here for us, again, is making sure that it's quality over quantity. So if we are going to allow them, just making sure that we're going to get something that, of course, is quality, and that's just not simply a cut plywood. For example, the townhome signs would not be preferred, and we would want something that has a little bit more style to it, as the one on the Keller Williams sign. A couple of other criteria, too, is that we would ask that the subdivision itself be located within our sphere of influence and that it incorporate the city logo, again, simply for aesthetic reasons. Window signs, we are not proposing any modifications to the existing code. Right now, our zone district has a maximum of 35% of the window. Those obviously exceed our standards. Those are not from our community, by the way. I just found those online. The one thing, we have been a bit lax in terms of enforcement. However, our plan is to do exhaustive public outreach to the business community, informing them of our regulations, not necessarily to penalize anyone, but again, to simply inform people to make sure that they're in compliance with our zoning code. Temporary signs are one of the, in terms of my research, were probably the most discussed sign types, and there's great variation between the different sign types. There's balloon signs, the streamers, what are commonly referred to as dolphin signs or flags, which are the Cricket, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon on the bottom. There's temporary banners, and then there's the air inflated balloons. So one of the things that we are proposing here, again, we're proposing to relax our regulations in terms of the number. However, we're not proposing to relax the regulations in terms of the timing or when they can be placed on the property. And you can see there in terms of what we're proposing. The key there, I think, is to allow them for a total of 90 calendars per year. That reflects exactly what we have on the books right now. The biggest change here, again, is that we would allow for a greater number of signs in terms of what's compared today, but the duration is the same.
Arnaldo, before you go on, can you go back to that last slide? Could you clarify that first one per street frontage plus 2 flags per street frontage? So are you saying you could have 3 of those dolphin type signs, or just explain that for me?
Yes, so you would be able to have a total of 3 dolphin signs, or if you wanted an air inflated sign or big balloon plus the 2 flags. So in total, it's a total of 3, but you couldn't have, say, 3 balloons. You could have the 1 balloon plus the 2 flag signs. So,
right.
So really a total of 3.
Thank you.
And then the temporary banner, of course, being the 60 square feet. Seasonal display, our existing code is silent on seasonal display. These are very common in larger shopping centers. They'll place holiday decorations for the holiday season, for Halloween or something along those lines. The key with these is that they are not permitted to have any advertising, and that's extremely common in zoning codes. So they can identify the shopping center name or the season or something along those lines. However, those couldn't say, hypothetically, a product, say Pepsi, 2 for $4 or something along those lines. Political signs. This was added based on feedback from the Planning Commission. This largely follows the State Caltrans guidelines. The key, I think, here is simply to have them removed 7 days after a general election so they don't blow away with the wind or if they're not deteriorating well after the election. A couple of other sign types to identify: prohibited signs. These are currently not permitted in our code. We are not proposing to allow them in our community. Those would be fence, pole signs, posters and snipes, roof signs, vehicles, and moving mannequins, and I'll go through each of those just really quick. So this is an example of a fence sign. We did, however, add a language to allow them out on sports fields, public sports fields, and that was at the request of the Planning Commission. Pole signs are currently not permitted, and to my knowledge, those have been prohibited since at least 2004. We are not proposing to allow those. However, any pole sign that's currently existing, this code update does not impact that whatsoever. However, I will discuss non-conforming signs in a few minutes. Snipe signs.
Arnaldo, could you go back to pole
Yes.
signs for just a minute? This is just a point of clarification. In the industry, I understand what you're talking about here is a pole sign, the signs that are above the ground and mounted on a pole. But a monument sign in the industry is considered a pole sign because they anchor a pole in the ground and that monument sign is mounted to that pole. So do we need some kind of differentiation between a monument sign and this type of sign? Because in the industry's definition, they're both pole signs.
That's an excellent point. One of the things that we've added is base criteria. So to try, in our attempt to differentiate between the two, I've incorporated graphics in our current code, in the proposed code, which do not exist in our existing code. And the other item that I've added is that the sign itself has to be a minimum, or the base has to be a minimum of 75% of the actual sign itself. So if any of these signs were to have a base, well, the white lumber sign would not be permitted whatsoever. The opposite sign, if they were to lower that and add a base, that's a sign that could potentially be in our community.
Okay.
Snipe signs, these are the signs that that are found through our community. We've made a concerted effort over the past couple of months to try to eliminate these. At one point, we had probably removed, I'm going to guesstimate, approximately 400 of these signs. And one of the things that we did is, in the process, we actually reached out to a lot of the business owners. We contacted them and informed them that their businesses are welcome in our community. However, their signs, unfortunately, are not, and there's other forms of advertising. Roof signs are currently not permitted. We are not proposing to allow those. And I know one of the big ones, or probably the most famous roof sign, is either the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood or the Public Market in Seattle. However, for every one of those, you're probably going to get about 3,000 or 4,000 of the bakery signs. Most communities, to my knowledge, have no longer permit those unless you're in an extremely urban area with multi-story buildings, sometimes in 10 or 12 stories in height. Vehicle signs. Vehicle signs are currently not permitted, and we are not proposing that we allow these. Vehicle signs can be challenging because the goal here is not to have businesses not advertise on their vehicles. Rather, it's for the sole purpose of advertising. So hypothetically, if you have a van and it's called Arnoldo's Dog Shop, I simply couldn't park that out on Civic on State Route 20 for 2 days at a time. Rather, the goal is you can have it, but not for the sole purpose of simply advertising purposes. And there are a couple here in our community that currently do that. Moving mannequin signs, there was a lot of discussion for moving mannequin signs in 2011. They're not currently permitted. We're not proposing to allow those either.
Arnaldo, can I go back to the vehicle signs? So there's a number of different businesses in town that have vehicles that do that advertising. So what you're saying is that in the future, those would not be allowed to park on the street like they have been doing?
They are currently not permitted, and they will continue to not be permitted.
So we will start enforcing it, basically, is what we'll do.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
A couple of other things that I just quickly wanted to highlight. In terms of the master sign program, a master sign program is not something that the city currently has. The goal with the master sign program is to have new shopping centers come in to make sure that we have some uniformity across the sign types, not necessarily colors, but just making sure that the signs themselves are in the proper locations. we're proposing to permit subdivision signs, flags, which are not currently permitted. So if you're under construction for subdivision, you would be permitted to have subdivisions. The number of flags is predicated on the size of your property or the number of lots that you have. Real estate signs, our code is currently silent on real estate signs. We've established some criteria. Drive-through menu boards, our current code is silent. We're proposing language. And overall flags, we're proposing to add a language. One of the things that I did want to highlight are non-conforming signs. If you have a non-conforming sign in our community, and we have a good number of non-conforming signs, every pole sign in our community is a non-conforming sign. Those signs can stay. This code does not impact those signs whatsoever. If you're a property owner and if you simply want to change the advertisement, you're more than welcome to do that. We have no regulations to say that sign has to be removed or modified. The exception being if there's an abandoned sign, and an abandoned sign is a sign that has not been used for 90 or more days. Once that sign is no longer used, the city would typically send a letter requesting that they remove it. And then we've also added some new criteria for sign maintenance and sign definitions. So, with that being said, we're here this evening to introduce the update to Title 8, Chapter 5, Article 63 relating to signs, and Section 8-5.8055 relating to sign definitions. And we would request that the council waive the first reading, and we would also ask that the council add a condition for electronic message boards, adding a minimum 16 millimeter pixel pitch resolution for future electronic signs. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. We would come back to the city council at the next council hearing unless the city council would like to provide additional feedback or would instruct staff to conduct additional research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions at this time of Mr. Rodriguez? I am going to open this to the public.
I have a couple quick questions. You just mentioned 16 minimum, or actually it would be a maximum of 16, but in your presentation you had 14. So I just want to clarify, are we talking 16
Oh, no,
or 14?
I'm sorry. It's actually 14.
Okay, so that would be
Yeah.
the maximum amount of pixels is the 14 millimeter.
The spacing itself would be a maximum of 14?
Correct.
Right.
And then another question on the electronic signs. You said that it would require a use permit, but currently under the sign ordinance, public facilities, schools, theaters, and churches do not require a use permit, but they can have changeable copy sign. Are they going to be required to have a use permit, or are they still exempt from that because of the type of use that they are?
If it's a changeable sign, for example, if they're going out and changing the individual letters themselves, those are still permitted, and that's a changeable copy, and that's permitted without a use permit. The only time a use permit would be required is for an electronic message board, with the exception of gas stations for fuel price signs. A fuel price sign for a gas station would not require a use permit, and that would be an application that we can approve over the counter.
Well, since we haven't required that unchangeable copy for those specific types of uses, wouldn't it make sense that they still would be grandfathered in, wouldn't have to require a use permit, even if they change to an electronic sign? I mean, it's still a changeable copy sign, it's just a different type of changeable copy.
If the council's prerogative is not to require a use permit, we can definitely take a look at that. One of the challenges when we're looking at them is there's such a large variation, and it is somewhat of a new technology. It's probably not a new technology in some of the larger cities such as Las Vegas, but it's new to Yuba City. And the one concern that I think we would have is making sure that we're getting them in the right location, that there's that it's a transparent process, and that there's public outreach in the process. Hypothetically, say in a couple of years or even 6 months, if the very first 1 or 2 signs go up and it's a quality sign, and if we have the right standards in our zoning code, then I would absolutely agree that then I would recommend that we revisit it and potentially remove the use permit requirement altogether.
I know that there's a number of schools in the community that have put in electronic signs even before we had this as a part of our sign ordinance. And from what you've said tonight, with the maximum number of pixels at 14 millimeter or the spacing for that, and then the monochrome. So many of these schools are already monochrome and they don't meet that 14 millimeter maximum between the pixels. So how do we deal with the ones that have already put those signs up?
We're going to arrest the principal. No.
Okay.
No. School sites are a little bit unique because they don't
Right.
fall under the city's jurisdiction. And so they actually follow under the state architects. So they're really basically exempt from our local zoning regulations. So I don't want to say they can do as they please, but they don't necessarily have to follow our regulations.
All right, thank you. That was my questions.
Any other questions before I open it to the public? I'll open it to the public. Any member from the public that wishes to speak to this item may do so at this time. Specific to the sign ordinance, there's no mad rush. We'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council for action.
To the mayor. Go ahead. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve staff's recommendation.
I was going to go ahead and second that then.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
To the mayor, I did have one concern regarding the monochrome coloring. There are many businesses that have logos, that's way near the beginning, sorry about that, that have monochrome registered names, designs, and that's all they have. Yeah, that one right there. That is their brand. Mm-hmm. And for us to require them to have something other than that would be imposing upon them something that would be, I think, improper.
Yeah.
That's a flaw in the monochrome. I understand, I like more color, but many of them, that's their logo. So I think...
Give us an example, because I don't know of any. I'm trying to understand what you're saying, because I don't know that many of them have. I see the red lettering, that's what we're talking about.
Okay, you just look at the brand source.
Okay.
Okay, if that would be their sticker, exactly the same thing on any box or anything that they would have, that's their sticker. That's who they are. People would recognize something like that. I can't give you an example exactly right now.
I understand that, but what we're talking about is the lettering below there, the electronic portion.
This
Because you're
one
just
right
talking about the electronic.
That's just that portion of it,
Yes.
which would be
Okay.
either red, green, or
That's
amber.
what I was
what
not
it's-
getting.
What we're talking about when we talk about monochrome, is that
Okay, you're
correct?
just talking the electronic only would not,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
good. I thought something was wrong with that. You guys would miss something that big. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other discussion? Hearing none. Go ahead.
Even though we've already made a motion and so forth, I just want to say thank you very much. This is a very concise report. I've been working on these sign ordinances as a planning commissioner for many, many years, so it's nice to see this move forward. And the report that you put together was very thorough and concise and very easy to read, so we appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
All those in favor of the well, you know, I crack up because I hope that there wasn't an attempt at an amendment here, but anyway, yeah. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. That gets done with that one quickly.
I have the next one, too. I emailed that to you a few minutes ago.